Hello, I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining me. Alright, so in this tutorial, what we're going to do is set up a simple communication between our Arduino and a circuit we set up and a sketch in processing. So it's going to be pretty straightforward, and I just kind of want to get you familiar with the Arduino side and a little bit of the processing side of this information pass. Okay, so in order to do this sketch, all you need is your Arduino. You're going to need a push button, momentary push button, one 10K resistor, 10K ohm resistor, two jumper wires, and a breadboard. Now, setting up the circuit, we're just putting together a push button, and the push button is going to be connected to pin number 4. So one side of the push button with a jumper wire goes to pin 4 on the Arduino, and then on that same side of the push button, we're going to connect the 10K ohm resistor to ground. Okay, so basically, when the button is not being pressed, pin 4 is always going to see ground, right? Because it's directly connected to ground. Now, with the other jumper wire, we're going to take the other side of the push button and we're going to connect it to 5 volts. But the only time pin 4 is going to see 5 volts is when we press the button. Okay, so just a straightforward button circuit. Alright, so that's it. Let's go ahead and jump into processing. Alright, so here we are in processing. What we're going to do is go up to File, Examples. It's going to open up a little applet here, and that's going to normally be closed. So what we're going to do is come down to Libraries, and we are interested in the serial library. So we'll click Serial here, and then we want to open up Serial Read. Alright, so let's take a look at this sketch. Okay, so we've got some comments at the top. We're used to seeing comments. That's pretty straightforward. We come down here, and here's a line of code. Import processing.serial.*. And so basically what this line of code is doing is it is importing the serial library for processing. Not much more to say there. I mean, if you've gone through the library tutorials, you know what that kind of entails. So there's some functions available that are associated with a class. We want to be able to use that class in processing. Okay, here we are initializing and declaring variables. Again, very similar to what we'd see in Arduino. So here, what they're actually doing is creating an instance of a class. Again, if this sounds a little confusing, just kind of review those library videos and it will make more sense. But they are making a instance of the serial class, and it's called myPort. There's going to be functions associated with this myPort that allow us to read and write information to and from the serial port. Okay, really enough about that. And then this is kind of an interesting variable here. It's an integer and it's named val. And what val is going to do is it is going to hold the information that we collect from the serial port. And so let's just do a quick review of how this is going to work. Arduino is going to write information to the serial port, and processing is going to check the serial port, see if anything's there, and it's going to take the information in the serial port, it's going to pull it out, and it's going to assign it to that variable val. And it's that's it. Alright, so moving on, we can see there's a void setup, just like Arduino has a setup. Man, that's why I really went with processing. It's got these similar aspects to it. Now, inside the curly brackets for void setup, we've got a function called size. Again, we're not too worried about this. This is going to determine the size of the applet window that opens when you hit run in processing. And then we've got some comments here, and these comments are very important because they talk about this line of code right here that can be just a bit tricky. So we're going to try to talk through this, but it's actually a lot easier to just kind of see and mess with than to talk about, but we're going to talk about it just shortly. So here's the deal. Your Arduino talks to your computer using a serial port. So I'll just point it out real quick. Here's our Arduino program. When we go to Tools and we go to Serial Port, it's going to list all the serial ports that processing would be looking at or Arduino would be looking at. All right, and there's going to be a little check mark next to the port that your Arduino is using. Okay, so again, this is the Arduino IDE. You go to Tools, Serial Port, and then you just check which port are you using. Now, a Mac, this is usually what the serial ports look like. Something similar to this. Okay, on a PC, usually it's like COM1, COM2, COM3, COM4, something like that. Now, it's actually much easier on a PC when we're trying to figure out what port we want to talk to, because generally speaking, Arduino will default to your first COM port, okay? And so you won't have to change this line of code at all. All right, because what this line of code is, let's just take a look at this line of code. What it's saying is it's creating a string, and a string is just a line of characters. It's naming that string port name, and it's setting it equal to a function called serial.list, but more specifically, it's setting it equal to the first element in that function. All right, so serial.list, that's a function, and then this is specifying the element inside, the first element inside that string. Okay, that syntax is a little different than you're used to seeing, but that's just how it is. So 0 here generally works on a PC. Here's one way to figure out if this doesn't work as this setting. When you hit run and you get some type of error, nothing's communicating, what you can do is type this simple function. It's called print line. You've probably seen it before. And what you're going to do is just print that function right there, serial.list. And what this is going to do is it is going to print off down here all of the serial ports. Okay? And then you'll know which one to choose. Now I happen to know, I want to say it's like 5. Oops. I happen to be using the 5th one. Alright, so you know what, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to run this real quick. And I will minimize that. So here's down here the listing of all the serial ports. Again, these are the exact same ones that I just showed you over on my Arduino. There's the Bluetooth incoming port, the Bluetooth modem, the USB 141, Bluetooth, blah, blah, blah. And then here's this last one, TTY Bluetooth 141. See the line, it wraps around here. So all I'm doing is I'm just counting these out. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so it is the 6th port. Now you're probably asking, well, why do you have 5 in there then? Well, strings are indexed just like arrays. So the index of a string starts at 0. So this is actually the 5th element in the character string. Okay, so that probably makes sense. All right, so basically, and another way to do it is just to try some different numbers after you list your serial port if you're still not sure. Okay, try 1. It may work. If it doesn't work, try 2. I mean, that's kind of like bulldozing it, but that's one way to try 2. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop this now. All right, so there we are. String port name equals serial.list. All right, so we're finding our serial port. The final line of code here in the setup is initializing the instance of that serial class. Okay, so again, really not too worried about it. I mean, you can see they're just specifying the baud rate, the port name, which is going to be the port that we just identified, and then this is just a really funky syntax name for setting up a class and processing. So really not too worried about it. Okay, so again, the only thing you're really going to be interested in is these 2 lines of code, and it's probably going to work just fine if you're on a PC. You might just have to change that number here or there, and if you're on a Mac, you'll almost absolutely have to change that number. But you can use the print line serial.list kind of setup here to do that. Before we move on to void draw, I am going to draw your attention to the very bottom of the sketch, and you'll notice there's some code down here that has been commented out. And up here it says wiring/Arduino code. So what they've been kind enough to do is include the code that we can load on our Arduino. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to come to Arduino, and I'm going to paste it in here. So all this code that they gave us, I can throw right into my Arduino. That's how awesome the folks up at Processing are, that they did that for us. Okay, so before we look at the draw portion of processing, let's look at this Arduino code. So this should all be more familiar to us. So here up at the top, they got some comments, all right, and basically it's code for sensing a switch status and writing the value to the serial port. So here, INT switch pin 4, so this is the switch is connected to pin 4. Here we're using a button. Switch doesn't make a difference. We'll be happy there. It's just an integer variable. We move into setup, and in setup we're just declaring the mode of the switch pin, which is going to be an input, because again we want to read information in from the button. We want to know, is it being pushed or is it not? Is it high or is it low? And then we want to start serial communication. So we do serial begin and set the baud rate at 9600. Alright, nothing crazy here. So now we come down to void loop, and it stays not very crazy. So what I mean to say is it stays relatively simple. So let's take a look at what we've got here. We've got an if statement, actually an if-else statement. And the first condition in this if statement says digital read switch pin equal high. So what is that? What is that asking? So if the digital read of switch pin, if the output of digital read is high, then do this right here. So basically what is that saying? That's saying if we're pressing down the button, we know that when we do a digital read at pin 4, it's going to return the value high. Alright, so if we're pressing the button, do this. Well, what do we do? Well, we use a function called serial.write, and we send the value 1. So you've seen serial print, and now here is serial write. And the only difference is that serial write is actually sending bytes. Alright, so it's going to encode that value 1 in a series of bytes, as opposed to serial.print, which actually sends the characters. Okay, so we're not interested in the characters, we're interested in the bytes, because that's what processing is going to be interested in, the bytes. Okay, so we do serial.write. I mean, it's that simple. We send a 1. Or if we're not pressing the button, what do? Well, if we're not pressing the button's up, then we just do a serial.write 0. And that closes the if else statement, and then we delay 100 milliseconds. And then we do that all over again. So we're constantly checking what is the state of the push button. And based on that state, we're going to be sending a value to the serial port. And that is it. That's it. That's all you have to worry about on the Arduino side. You know how to send information already. So you're kind of a master at this already. So you can imagine right now we're just sending a discrete value like a 1 or a 0. But, and that's because we've got a button hooked up. But could you imagine if we had a potentiometer hooked up, that maybe we could send an entire range of values? Or if we had a sensor hooked up, we could send an entire range of values. Alright? And we're going to be sending that using the serial write function. Alright, so again, this is just a really simple example of how we're going to handle it on the Arduino side, but it really doesn't get much more complicated than this, which is nice to know. Alright, so now we know how we're getting information from the Arduino to the serial port. Now we need to figure out, well, how are we going to grab the information from the serial port into processing? So let's go back to processing. Okay, so here we are. Remember, we had just finished the setup. We figured out which port to point our new instance of the class to, and now we're in void draw. And draw is to processing, which loop is to Arduino. Alright, it holds all the big stuff. So what's the first thing we do here? And again, we're not going to get too crazy in depth on this because we don't have to. But let's just take a look at it. So the first thing is an if statement. And it says if my port.available is greater than 0, then do something, right? So my port dot available, what that's basically saying is, hey, look at the serial port. If there's any value in there greater than 0, then that means some information has been sent, okay? And the dot available function is specifically looking at the bytes that are in the serial port, not the value. Because you might say, well, hey, what if I passed the number 0? Well, we passed the number 0, but we sent it as a series of bytes, okay? So it's not looking, is there the value 0 at the serial port? It's looking, are there any bytes basically at the serial port? Okay, that's what the myPort.available is looking at. So I know that could be a little bit confusing because you're thinking, well, hey, we're sending a 0. You know, shouldn't we have it set as something else? But anyway, all right, so what do we do if it is available? Well, what we're going to do is, see this val variable that we set before? We're going to set it equal to myPort.read. So I could imagine, I mean, that's pretty intuitive name right there. MyPort.read is going to read the value at the serial port into this variable value. All right, so now value is going to hold whatever value we sent. All right, so myPort.read, it reads the bytes, and then it's going to assign the value of those bytes to this variable, which happens to be val. Hey, so that's easy. Now, this is, now we get into some more processing, very specific processing code here, and it sets background as 255. So the background color, this function sets the color of the background of the applet. All right, and so we're saying set the background to white. I'm not worried about that. And so now here's really where it gets a little interesting. Now it says if val is equal to 0. So what's that for us? For us, that means if we're not pressing the button, then we're going to fill with 0. 0 happens to be black. Okay, so 255 is white, 0 is black. All right, so we're going to fill, ends up being, we're going to fill a little square with black. Otherwise, so what's otherwise for us? You know, else. So either we're not pressing the button and the value is 0, or we are pressing the button, the value is 1, so that would fall into this else category. Then we're going to change the color to a light gray, which is somewhere between 0 and 255, 204, so that's a light gray. And then what it does is it draws a rectangle with those dimensions. Okay, does this seem straightforward enough? Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go to my Arduino IDE. I'm going to upload the sketch. I'm going to hope it works. Alright, so it's uploading, and I can see the transmit light is on my Arduino board. And I know that, you know, I can see the light blinking, and that makes sense because I'm not pressing the button. Alright, so I'm not pressing the button, and the else statement says, hey, if you're not pressing the button, you know, if the pin's not high, write 0. Okay, so that's easy enough. So what I'm not going to do is go up to Tools and go to Serial Monitor, because if you do that, then processing is going to say, hey, some other program is already messing with that serial port, I'm not allowed in there. So you don't want to do a serial monitor. Now, if you want to do, some things you can do when debugging this is to do a serial.print and print the same value, you know, print that value to the serial monitor, and then, you know, do a little serial monitoring, and so you can see what, you know, make sure the correct values are getting sent. So that's just one troubleshooting thing, but just make sure that you don't open up the serial port when you're trying to write to processing. So now I'm going to come into processing. I'm going to hit run, and here's the little applet that gets opened. I've got a black square because remember, if val is equal to 0, then it's going to fill it 0, and again 0 is black, and so this little rectangle is filled with black. Now I'm going to press the button. Oh, hey, look, the button is filled with gray. Alright, so else fill with 204, which happens to be the color gray. Okay, hey, I mean, that's kind of neat, right? Look, I think it's neat. I bet my kids would love that. So that's really what I wanted to demonstrate. I wanted to show you how easy it is to get your Arduino to talk to some type of intermediate program, and in this case we're using processing. It's really that easy. And you know, it doesn't, Generally speaking, on the Arduino side, it really doesn't matter what that intermediate program is running on your computer. We could have some Python script, or we could have, some type of MATLAB script or whatever running. It's all going to pretty much, on the Arduino side, it's pretty much going to look the same. You're just doing a serial dot write. Pretty easy, huh? So, hey, that's it. Thank you so much for listening to this tutorial. I cannot wait to see you at the next tutorial. Make sure to do the challenge. All right, see you next time. Bye.
La 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 la.